So welcome to the November 14th, 2024 Concord Historical Commission meeting. We are conducting this meeting online in accordance with the Commonwealth of Massachusetts Executive Order suspending certain provisions of the open meeting law. The public may access this call and meeting through both telephone and video conferencing. Members of the public will have an opportunity to ask questions and provide public comments on topics and discussions following presentations and questions from the Commission. To do so, please raise your hand in the participant function of the Zoom meeting platform. I will mute microphones of those not speaking in order to preserve bandwidth and may need to turn off video with the exception of the commissioners, the host, and the current applicant. I will call on each commissioner for comments on the topic and then open the meeting for public comment. Once there are no more public comments, I will ask for a motion from the Commission to vote on the applicant if that is necessary. At this time, I would like to ask for a roll call from the Commission members to make sure that we have a quorum. Members of the Commission, would you please identify yourself, starting on my right?
Doug Ellis.
Melissa Selfield.
Alan Bogosian.
Nancy Nelson.
Nancy Bracelotti.
Lauren Meyer.
And we do have a quorum here tonight. So at this point, I'd like to turn the meeting over to Elizabeth Watson from Heritage Strategies out of Pennsylvania. Elizabeth, the meeting is yours.
Well, welcome everyone. It's good to see a nice turnout and also a turnout on Zoom. This is a hybrid meeting, and we're going to be asking this audience to participate, and we're asking the Zoom audience to ask questions via chat, and we have someone monitoring the chat for us. We're going to make this work if we can, because it's great to see people coming in from remotely. Let me share my screen and turn on the show. Does that mean we have people coming in? Mm-hmm. Okay, good. Welcome. All right, here we go. So this is just a very brief slideshow that's partly to help orient you to what you're going to be doing on the boards over here. Lauren, would you mind if just passing around some? I mean, I think we should put the stickers out now for people if they want. What the idea is that you would write comments, and we're not we're asking you to, if you have ideas that would work with some of the things that we're going to be talking about. So just be ready. And if you have questions or comments or ideas, we're going to want you to be doing that. We have pens and we have these things. And these are the posters that you're going to be looking at, walking around and talking to one another, we hope. So this is the agenda. I'm going to talk very briefly about preservation and sustainability, touch on the planning process, tell you a little bit about what we've learned, and then spend most of our time on the emerging ideas for action. Preservation is sustainability. It is a very important part of just about everything a community does. Transportation, housing, public works, everything that a community does, you'll find historic preservation somewhere in that. And so it's an important element to be thought about as you think about the whole sustainability nexus of society, environment, and economy. So it's supporting public values through preservation. That's our goal here, is what public values can we be supporting in Concord for you all? You have multiple plans, surprisingly large number of great plans for a small community like Concord, although there is probably no other community like Concord. So you have a great community development plan, open space and recreation, housing, climate action and resilience, the community development being your Envision Concord, which is your comprehensive plan. In that comprehensive plan, you developed 5 criteria for decision making. Everything that Concord does should be should be run through these criteria. This diagram comes from your comprehensive plan from Envision Concord. And as you can see, history and character is one of those filters. Any decision about spending money or undertaking a project should be asking a question about history and character, impact on livability and values, mobility and accessibility, environment and sustainability, and fiscal sustainability. So there's a whole system that the comprehensive plan is proposed for coordinating with that. The planning process, this is an image from the Massachusetts Cultural Resource Information System. It is accessible to all of you. If you type in MACRIS, Massachusetts, you'll probably get it. And this is an interactive map where you can just look up your own site to see if your house is in the inventory that we have already or any information we have. So phase one was a lot of this, background research. We have a whole report on National Register and on the inventory and MACRIS and all of the other things that are going on. We've talked to a lot of people. We've organized lots of information. And some of that is going to be on the web. Some of it's going to be appendixes to the plan, and a lot of it forms the basis for what we will write. One of the things that we did in phase two, or the phase two is about public outreach. Who do we talk to? How should we organize? How we collect information from the community? A big one was the community survey. As you can see, we've got one question. Please choose 2 preservation goals that you think the town should tackle first. And you can see that the agenda is pretty long. Most of the things that we offered, the only 2 improved tools that help historic preservation owners is the green bar, and the pink bar is other. Everything else that we ask on this list is important to the community, as these bars indicate. Another question was, please rank the following preservation goals according to how well you believe they are being achieved in Concord. You can look over these, and this show is going to be available on the web for you all to spend any time you would like on this. And the survey, results for the survey will also be up soon. So we really looked at, we read, there's probably thousands of comments, and I've got a few to give you in the beginning here, but the community survey, that there were a lot of themes: the national historical significance, Green Concord, education. I mean, a long list that we sort of boiled everything down to sort of look at how, what were we learning. So here's, let's see, I was trying to make this thing go, and we'll see if this works. Okay, so here's some sample, if you recognize yourself, congratulations, because we were reading a lot. We have a lot of different questions, qualitative questions, where people answered themselves what they wanted to say. And I'm actually operating this myself instead of it being animated, so these are a lot of great comments that we got, and you can see the variety. People had all kinds of different things to tell us. And we asked, where do you see gaps? And, you know, you can see it's a wide range of different folks, you know, working through different issues that came up for them as they went through this survey. So the ideas that are emerging for us for action, what you're going to see is goals on the screen. And then I'm going to talk to you about each of these posters, and that's what the handout is that you have. This is actually an example of an indigenous cultural landscape. One of the recommendations you'll see on the posters is that we conduct a survey of Concord's landscape through the lens of how would indigenous populations have used this landscape. How would they have moved about? Where would they have settled? How would they have used the resources in the landscape? And this is coming out of a methodology that was developed for the Chesapeake Bay, the area that I'm actually from. And they've studied the Susquehanna River and the Chesapeake Bay, and there's some really wonderful work that has been done there. And we think that it will help us not only with just simply understanding where archaeology might be, but where other things might be as well, or what stories we can tell, and what open space might be worth protecting. So the first focus is on operations, and we have a goal: ensure strategic and cost-effective all of this. And up here we have suggested supporting actions. What are the things that we need to do to achieve this goal? And so we've got history and character, the core value that I just talked about. What is the procedure you can use to have every committee, every board thinking about historic preservation and all the other criteria that are in the plan? Streamline processes for residents and address emerging issues. conduct annual planning and routine evaluations. When you report to the public, try to tie it to your goals, do more celebrations of accomplishments, and ensure sufficient staff, volunteer, and financial resources to support this plan. The second is an extremely important conversation to have in this community about education and communication. You all are remarkable for the number of high-quality museums and interpretive sites, educational sites that you have throughout the community. And we really want to see this, see you expand public understanding and appreciation of Concord as a place of memory, meaning, and inspiration, cultivate authentic experiences of Concord's places, and advance appreciation of the preservation field itself. It's a little bit like going into a museum and appreciating the art and not understanding how the art got on the wall. How Concord saved itself is actually a story, a very important story as it happens. You've got one of the oldest preservation efforts in the country. In 1835, you saved the North Bridge when Reverend Ripley donated the land to the town in 1835. That's a really early time. Nobody was thinking about saving George Washington's Mount Vernon until 15 or so years later. So in education and communication, some of the things that we want you to be looking at is considering and evaluating cost-effective and impactful ways of making Concord's Heritage Program more visible and valued. Using a survey program, survey meaning going out and looking in the landscape and understanding your historic resources, finding those stories, and helping to tell a more complete American story through that work. Encouraging coordination among historical and cultural institutions. We had a wonderful focus group with some of the representatives of those institutions to talk about that, and adopting guidelines for public education that emphasize mission and public trust responsibilities. So if you're hearing this, if you've got ideas about what you want to see, you're not hearing it from me, put it on your Post-it notes, and we're going to stick them up on the boards. And you can all see what everybody is reading and writing, and we'll be talking about it as well. So stewardship, we want to see you advance knowledge and inform decisions through better understanding of the research and documentation you have. On the screen, you've got mid-century modern resources. There is you're going to be getting, we hope, CPC is being asked to support a survey of mid-century modern resources, which are now well beyond the 50-year mark when we start wanting to have information about these historic resources in our inventory. So the documentation is, you guys are in the top 20 in Massachusetts for how many resources you have already documented, and you really didn't go past 1949. So you have a lot of resources. You should see the graph. I mean, you double your resources after 1949. You have a lot of things out there from before that, and they were documented pretty well. Now what we want you to do is to upgrade those surveys and understand better how everything lies in the landscape. And I've got some maps about that in a little bit. But so you have an open space framework in your wonderful open space and recreation plan, and that would help us guide the surveying, especially out beyond the centers, the village centers. The indigenous cultural landscapes I mentioned, in collaboration with tribal partners, and then encouraging more National Register listings. I have a slide to show you about that. I don't know if that's the next slide or not. Yeah, there it is. Secure optimum protection for and prevent further loss of historic buildings, places, neighborhoods, et cetera, particularly those with national and international meaning, but everything makes Concord, Concord, so it's all important. What you're seeing here is, remember the Macris map I showed you with all those little blue and red dots? Red is National Register. This is laid over your map of historic districts. Local historic districts are the best way to protect resources, so you've done a great job. They're not as extensive as I might have expected with the quality of resources you have, but you have great local historic districts. Very little is listed in the National Register. All of these, can you see me do this? So this is the American Mile. Those are protected through both National Register and local historic district. Almost nothing else in all of your other historic districts are protected by National Register listing. So we'd like to see you do more with that, okay? Let's go over here. Where do we go? Here we go. So you have several supporting actions that we think you can do is in establishing single property local historic districts. You don't have a process in Massachusetts for protecting individual historic properties through landmarking. You might hear that phrase landmarking, it's kind of out there. But in Massachusetts, the best way to protect a single property, say something that's important sitting out in the rural part of Concord, one property, you can make it a local historic district. It doesn't have to be more than one property. It can be just one property. It can be a historic district. So that's an important one. Also encouraging owners of National Register properties to donate preservation restrictions to Historical Commission. It's worth it in Concord. I have been looking at conservation and preservation easements my entire career, which is very long at this point, and I've watched the growth of the land trust community and all the things that happen there. We have not seen the level of protection that we should be achieving in preservation, and Concord needs it. Concord needs it. Protecting archaeological sites. This has been on your list of things to do since your first plan in 1995. And let's see if we can get it done by writing it up in this plan, using the indigenous cultural landscape approach to begin to educate the community about why this is so important. You have an extraordinary landscape from a biological, geological point of view. If you read your open space plan, you'll see a wonderful write-up about this. And you are special because of the special natural resources you have. And that is true also of your archaeological resources, both prior to 1635 and into the written historical record that we also have. So it's very important. So we're thinking a new bylaw for archaeology or some kind of adjustment of your wetlands bylaws and some of the other things that we have to think about how that's going to work. And then also a policy to assess sites for archaeological potential that are town-owned prior to site work. That would be something the town would be modeling. So the next one is protecting the historic character of Concord's countryside to support human health and well-being in Concord's agricultural, open space, biodiversity, and sustainability resilience goals. That was not rewritten, and it is rewritten on what the official goal is what's written on your site. But what's important to see here is this is a map of your scenic byways. Okay, the Historical Commission did the work of the Lord and really fought to get 9 scenic roads designated under the state bylaw, basically. So these are where those roads are. Now, here's something interesting. There is your open space framework. Everything that's gray, it's a little harder to read. Everything that's gray is developed. And so the sort of dark green and the light green and all of that is where you have more of the resources the open space plan is calling to protect. Now, of course, you're threaded with trails, lots of accessibility to all of this. So it's a wonderful plan. When you put the two together, you'll see that your scenic byways are where the open space plan is trying to protect resources also. So how can we bring you together and really think through protecting Concord's countryside as it was called in the 1995 plan that you have? And we think that we have a number of different ways to think about that. And what did we say here? Basically, to develop a package of improved zoning and subdivision protections, and then also encouraging the CHC to protect the Historical Commission to participate directly in the pending update of your open space plan. There was a good effort in the current plan to accommodate historic resources, and I think people talk to each other, but we see a much broader possibility of talking through historic resources in the countryside and open space, and how do you think about the two together? Housing and sustainability, very important part of this. There's a difference between operating carbon emissions and embodied carbon emissions. It's an important principle to understand in terms of historic preservation. If it's already built, the greenest building is the one that's already built. There's some that are beginning to say the most affordable housing is the housing that's already built. there's a national expert, recognized national expert, who says anything built before 1970 should be preserved for housing alone. We're not talking historic preservation, but you can see how the two come together. So we would like to see you discouraging the demolition of smaller homes and the replacement with larger, more expensive homes, and encouraging renovation of existing single-family homes in outbuildings. This is called mansionization in Concord. It's a word that actually does not appear in your community survey, but everyone was talking about it in the survey. It was a really high number of comments about this problem. And we think that, where did we put it? Here we go. This is a long one, actually. That you could charge a fee for demolition review and designate the funds to support a diverse housing stock. We could extend demolition delay to 18 months to increase the difficulty in demolishing. Encouraging neighborhood conservation districts. You have very few, as I said, Concord's a really great place with very few historic districts in proportion to the resources that you have. How can we recruit your neighborhoods to understand what they could accomplish through that? And perhaps in that, we could slow the demolition of some of the smaller homes. Could we create some incentives and streamlining to favor historic preservation practices in the current housing production plan? The demolition of noteworthy smaller homes and renovation of basically not, the word noteworthy is ours for historic preservation, but these two goals of discouraging demolition and encouraging renovation are in your housing production plan already. So how do we take historic preservation and leverage historic preservation into that and get more? And then working with the Historical Commission, going into the pending update on the Climate and Action and Resilience Plan to really think through how do you measure the embodied carbon in all the buildings that you're tearing down and putting demolition waste in landfills and all the other bad things to do with demolition. How do you build that into the way you think about sustainability in Concord? And that's it. Oh wait, no, I went too fast. There we go, one more. Economic vitality. I said, preservation is everywhere. And when you're starting to think about cultural districts and you're thinking about how you're supporting your downtown and the arts and all the other good things, we want to see a goal written into this plan. How can you keep your places? Placekeeping and preserving unique historic character. It is also one of the big things that we heard out of the survey. People really, really value it. You have a very successful, it was, to me as a planner, wonderful to see you have a formula business prohibition so that you have kept chain type of businesses outside of your village centers. Really wonderful. I'm looking forward to breakfast over in West Concord in the morning. And let's see here, economic vitality. So participate in efforts involving physical changes to village centers. Participate in tourism management, visitor experience, and interpretive planning efforts. Participating in mobility planning, and participating in wayfinding. We're looking for ways that historic preservation can help to reinforce your downtowns. You have approached your village centers with a preservation mode. How can we make that even more robust? So that's it for what we have here. And there, I got a nice walk in Gowing Swamp. So this is the trail I took that picture. So we're going to spend a little time just talking and asking questions. And how are we doing on time? And you're my timekeeper.
It's just not by 7:30. Plenty of time.
Plenty of time. Great. Okay. So, comments, conversation. We would like to use the microphones, so we can pass them around.
They never work. Is this working? Great.
Yes. Yeah.
I'm delighted to hear about the sustainability and the natural spaces. But I'm also interested in, when we look at economic vitality, are we thinking primarily of more tourism or building, increasing the population of Concord? How does that look? What are your thoughts on that?
It's a great question, Tui. I think that You know, it was great to see you didn't have that many complaints about tourism in the community survey. I got it in spades in the focus groups. We had a focus group on economic vitality and heard a lot about concerns about tourism. The feeling is that the town is uncomfortable with as much tourism as you are getting at certain times of the year. You could do more tourism management planning to deal with that and really think through what are some of the things that other communities that have these pulses of visitorship and other issues that are going on, buses and everything else. It's I think that the participation in economic vitality should always keep in mind tourism impacts. It's important. Here's a really important preservation principle. Why am I talking about economics? The reason is because old buildings don't survive without great uses and owners who are making enough of a profit to be able to keep the buildings up. You don't get preservation without economic vitality. So that's the basic principle. So is tourism too much? Tourism is kind of like nitrogen. It's too much in the Chesapeake Bay and we get too much stuff going on. And you know, it's pollution. Not enough tourism and you're not supporting your businesses. And most communities cannot survive without some level of tourism. You would not be having the number of restaurants that you have in Concord without them. And then other services. So you have to find a balance, and it's a constant balancing effort. Yep.
The other side of that is, the other side of that is we all, I bet everybody in this room looks at, we call them McMansions. A house, I live in a little part of town where every time one of the small houses goes, a big one pops up. And we're all watching this and we're all complaining about it. And I'm wondering if you have technique, I mean, that's the other side. So you maybe keep small houses or build capacity for some less expensive housing so that there's more vitality coming into the town. That's the other side
Yes.
of increasing by tourism. Do you have techniques for dealing with that? I mean, we are all watching this and wringing our hands, right?
Well, you have demolition delay. Okay, it slows things down. You have 12 months now. We're recommending that at least for National Register eligible properties that you go to 18 months. Try to slow it down that way. That's not a promise that you'll save it, but it's something. You know, local historic districts, if it's something that they're going to tear down that is really so important to you, here in Massachusetts, you're able as a historical commission and historic districts commission to designate a local historic district. You'd have to have the town supporting you because that's how it works with town meeting. So that's the other end. Can you absolutely prevent demolition? Somewhere in between, it may be possible to, this is the incentives that I was talking about, historic preservation incentives, to, if the person has a building that they're willing to preserve, but they need more space, okay? If they work within the Secretary of the Interior standards, and they also keep whatever they're building out of view, and somehow we create some level of incentives and streamlining for that. They don't have to go through quite so much review at some other level and some other part of all this with the Zoning Board of Appeals or the Planning Commission. A lot of different moving parts to try to adjust and try to change the incentives. In Eastern Massachusetts, it's a tough row to hoe. And you've got a great, I think it was with Envision Concord, you had a mansionization committee, and there's a great report in there explaining why this is a problem and why it's difficult to solve. So we're only going to be able to nibble around the edges, but if we can understand what you have, where it's most important to preserve, maybe there are some ways that you can do that.
Melissa wants to make.
Well, I might just comment, because, I mean, we all totally agree with you, but a lot of the smaller homes that Tui references are not necessarily in a potentially historic district at all, and they're not National Register eligible. They're just appropriately sized homes for normal people.
Yeah.
And without, I mean, I particularly like the idea of trying to go to 18 months because we did get it up to 12. Also, charging a fee that could go into the kitty, that could maybe help for
And
affordable housing.
how large or lowered should that fee be?
You know, I would like to make it substantial, but it'd be hard to get
I
through.
have heard the same expert that I was citing earlier, sorry to interrupt you,
No.
the same expert said $200,000. Okay? And I know, radical, but listen, we're not fuddy-duddies in historic preservation world, right? we are on a tear on this, and we want to help. I mean, it's really a terrible thing to lose that kind of housing. So it's probably, I don't know if you could do it, but if you did that, then you'd have money to devote toward the production of new housing, multifamily, whatever works within your housing production plan. And there is a real problem with getting enough money to deal with this. You guys did not pass, the state did not pass legislation to allow for a property tax, transfer tax, which we have in Maryland, that can be used for that. So.
There's a difference between total demolition versus an addition of a smaller
Yeah.
2,000 square foot house versus knocking it down and putting up a 6,000.
So we have a question here.
And I think this dovetails with what Tui's comments were. When you look at protection of economic viability, I think we all sat through a town meeting where we looked at the potential fiscal cliff Concord is approaching, and how do we balance that along with the maintaining the character of Concord's downtown, of West Concord's downtown, when there is a need for diverse commercial activity, or even around the prison rotary where we have a historic prison that's now being decommissioned. How do we manage that, maintaining the flavor, but also making certain that we have financial fiscal viability for our community as we go forward?
Fiscal sustainability, and you're talking about ratables. You're saying that residential properties don't produce the amount of taxation that you need to serve those residences. They are almost never a moneymaker. Maybe here in some cases, I don't know. So this is what we're now moving into. Is you are due for another comprehensive plan update. And I would urge everybody in here to really pay attention and really urge that you get good data and understand exactly what's going on here. What can you do? You know, MCI Concord, you know, I'm not your planner that's going to be able to tell you how you're going to do that, but you have opportunities for properties that will produce some of that taxation. The Superfund site that you on Main Street that you guys are working on, also there's another opportunity there. So there, you have some hope.
But even beyond that, though, in looking at the downtown of West Concord or downtown of Concord, the balance in maintaining the flavor, but also making certain that there's economic viability for the community as the community goes forward.
Yeah, and one of the things that I heard about your downtowns to be alert to is that you have to be aware of where are your customers coming from, where are your entrepreneurs and owners coming from, and that is changing, even though the buildings have not. And so, and that could, the seeds of some threat could be in there as well. Maximizing the use of these buildings without losing them is the trick. And where else can you create commercial opportunities that will not harm downtown Concord and downtown West Concord? Yeah. You can see it's a rich conversation. Yes, sir. Thank you.
Very quick question. When I hear downtowns, do we have a list? Is it two? Or we're West Concord.
Yeah. When I say the word downtown, I'm thinking village centers, and I'm thinking 2 or 3, depending on how you count, Thorough Depot. Okay, the commercial area around. So I'm talking about your commercial areas. You know, if MCI Concord develops some commercial stuff, then you might have another place where you'll see some commercial development. You've got a little bit in there anyway in the Marriott and some of the other stuff. So, you know, it's a really nice mix right now. From my perspective as a visitor here, is that, you know, I've got different options to go different places and enjoy different experiences, and yet it's all pleasant and all, you know, really well organized for me as a visitor and I think for all of you as residents as well. But again, we just talked about, can they pay for themselves? Are they producing enough income for the town to cover its obligations? Am I answering your question?
I think so. New to the town, and landed in West Concord. And it is, sometimes tell friends, feel like I live in Mr. Rogers' neighborhood because everybody knows your name. Well, that's Cheers. But the commercial activity there is just magical. I mean, is magical. I really
Magical. I
really-
agree. I agree. West Concord's got something there.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And some of that is preservation, and some of it is just properties that are inexpensive enough for entrepreneurs to go in. You know, I mean, one of the things that the National Trust in Los Angeles and other places have looked at is the availability of that kind of space to encourage that kind of entrepreneurship. You know, like the Neshoba Bakery. You know, it's a great opportunity, and it's in an old building. And, you know, might not have worked if they'd had to rent a high-end building of some kind. You know, so lots of those.
Excuse me, can we have the participants identify themselves?
Yeah.
I'm sorry, what was that?
Could you identify yourself?
Oh, Maria Fitzgerald. So I think in general, people move to Concord for a variety of reasons, and it's not always historical Concord.
Granted.
So how do we educate? I mean, I didn't see anything about education, or so I think if people understand more, educate us, the community about how valuable the history of Concord is. That may make people more attuned to, let's say, I mean, in my neighborhood, I know we tried to pass a historical district down my neighborhood and it didn't pass. So I'm just wondering if there's ways to engage more people on the historic aspect of the town.
That came up very, we had a lot of detail talking about the old welcome wagon idea. And that it kind of, welcome wagon kind of exists. I think that all falls within the education and communication piece. And you're right. I mean, I live in part-time in Haddonfield, New Jersey, which is a phenomenal school, just like you guys have. And we have a phrase, it's called 12 years and 6 months. They move in for 6 months. They're there to send their kids for 12 years, and then they move out. And it's a pattern. And they are completely unaware of how the town got there, how the town stayed that way, why it's so good in other ways besides the schools. You know, it's a communication issue. The value is there, and I think if those folks have reasons to be there that also, you know, they're caring for their children, they care for the environment, that they're teaching their children about how they care for the community as well. So it's a big conversation, but it's doable, I think. So,
There's a chat question?
we have someone online. Kim, hi. Yes, go ahead.
Hi, my name's Kim Frederick. I live at 166 Main Street. I'm very interested in Concord's history, and I teach history here at Concord Academy. So I love all things history, but I also am a person who looks around me and sees how expensive the housing is. And also someone who thinks a lot about what the relationship is between lived experience and historic preservation, and that Concord needs to be a place where people continue to make history, where the people who live here feel that they themselves are living lives of importance. And so I guess I just, you know, as you say, we need to try and get more houses on the National Register. I'm thinking a lot about property values. I'm thinking a lot about how we make this be a place where people can afford to live now and where their children will be able to afford to live in the future. I think about my kids and how they will, you know, unless they decide to become investment bankers, will never be able to afford to live in the town they grew up in. And so I guess I sort of am asking you to talk maybe a little bit meditatively on how we think about the relationship between what gets preserved and what gets allowed to change. So how do we let buildings learn and grow? How do we let our town learn and grow? I agree, it's adorable and cute and wonderful, and I love its history. And so I guess I'm just thinking a lot about that relationship and how we get that right to allow it to be a place that's alive and that can continue to develop.
You said that so well. That's the meditation in some ways, but I'll add a couple of things. One is that as I mentioned, I've practiced for a very long time. I started in the 1970s. I'm almost as old as the historic preservation movement itself. And one of the things that we had to do back then is always argue, if you put in a historic district, it will increase your property values. And I almost feel like I've got whiplash that in the last 5 years, really, I mean, I'm a planner, I'm trained as a regional planner and, watch and learn about a lot of stuff. And I can tell you that the housing shortage that is causing the price rise has been building for 20 to 30 years at least. It was exacerbated by 2008 when we stopped producing many more houses, millions of houses. We're short millions of houses. And that is one of the reasons that the prices are going up. The desirability of Concord is also driving the prices, regardless of whether it's in or outside a historic district. And in fact, we have one historic districts commissioner who has done some analysis. Other communities have been doing this all along, going in and sort of doing it. But what we don't see a difference, at least in terms of the way he took a look. We don't see a difference in terms of whether historic district has changed the value or not. So it's other things that are driving it. And yes, this is something that came up in your survey, the cost of housing, affordability, and I'm very sad that the idea that families who have been here for a very long time are producing children who are not going to be able to continue to live here, because this is a good enough community with good enough jobs in the region that you could live here and you can grow up here and live here. And isn't that the ideal? It's sort of the American ideal, and we're losing that. I had one other thought, and maybe it'll come back to me, I'm sorry. But I think you've got so many houses here, and you have committed so much of your land. Let me do one thing that's a little different from what you're asking, but and that is that you have saved 1/3 of your property permanently, your open space, and 1/3 is developed. And how you choose to develop the rest of that third, perhaps there is the ability to add more housing to allow for more people to afford to be in here. 40B does that in some ways that are sort of distasteful for, I think, everybody who's a planner or not thinking about that. But that's what's being forced on you. I'm going to need a plug-in. This is your long-range planning again, because asking questions about how do you increase your population and continue to provide the services and all the other things that are going on, this is beyond the historic preservation movement, but we are a voice for all of that. And I think the Historical Commission, the Historic Districts Commission, and all of you here need to be participating in those plans to really think through, how does each log roll to the other? What's going to happen in all of this? Katie, where can I plug in?
Yes. What's got what I'm using?
Yes, we got it. You're good. Just don't trip over this. Okay, I'm very sorry. Did we talk enough about that? Do you want to, is there something, you have a rejoinder?
No, I mean, I thank you for the thoughts. It's a thing that's on my mind a lot recently, teaching a class about the history of American suburbs, and the students I have are diving deeply into this question of what should happen with the MCI Concord parcel. So a lot of these things are on my mind.
Yeah. Well, you know,
About what the relationship between preservation and open space and recreational land and residential and how the tax base of the town is, like all this stuff's just really in my head a lot right now. And so as I was listening to you talk and say, you know, how do we think about what should get on the National Register? I was just thinking about, you know, sort of the competing interests that are at hand as I feel like the moment that this MCI Concord parcel is really momentous for Concord. It's an incredible opportunity to have this gigantic piece of land open up so close to one of our downtowns. And so I just have a lot of things on my mind around these questions. So I just was interested to hear your thoughts. So thank you. I appreciate it.
well, I would say that I would hold you up as a model for doing this. One of my silver bullets is that long ago, when the environmental community was kicked out of federal support by the Reagan era, the environmental folks went and hardwired environmental curricula into every state. It happened first in a state I know well, which is Pennsylvania. And every single state you now require, and our kids are green, big time, they are green, but they don't know how their community works. And they don't, and as a subset of that, they don't know anything about preservation. And so now we've got people growing up, getting on your planning commissions and in your select boards, and not knowing a thing about how this works. And, you know, it's scary. And it really would be, my silver bullet is to go back and hardwire into the environmental curriculum, the civics curriculum, that folks need to really understand how their community works. And we have an enormous responsibility in terms of sustainability and climate action to do well at the local level. And how do we do that if we don't teach our children at the level that you're working at? Thank you. Yeah.
Hi, Joe Stein, 195 Stowe Street. Actually, quick question on the neighborhood conservation districts. So what is a neighborhood conservation district?
Right.
And then how might one go about advocating for one?
Thank you. And I need to define National Register also, because the implication might have been in that last conversation that National Register causes prices to go up or interference in housing. It doesn't. It keeps the federal and state funding out of your way. And if you choose to change your property under National Register, you don't. But here's the thing, is that when you go in front of public bodies and say this house is important, and it's not listed in the National Register, you might not get as much respect. So that's a definition. Let's do neighborhood conservation districts. NCDs are here in Massachusetts. There's some people who are concerned that one very bold town in Massachusetts spoiled it for all the rest of you by trying to use the neighborhood conservation district to do too much. It's meant to be a light version of design review. Just massing fences maybe, some of the setbacks that happen, and often what happens is that the neighborhoods themselves come up with their rules, and it's done very lightly. What we're thinking is that you could do this. It's not actually historic preservation rule, it's something that Massachusetts towns can do. And if you could pass a bylaw and sort of have that receptacle there for any neighborhood that wants to do this kind of thinking. You know, you're not interested in saving the trim on every building and, paint colors and whatever else we're doing in Concord. But, a little bit more neighborhood conservation that helps with scale, height, some of the other things that might help to sort of keep it. And, the instincts are there. I mean, I'm seeing changes in Concord. Not a lot, it's surprising, because most of Concord Center can be demolished. Most of it. Okay, anything outside of those historic districts can all go. They may have to wait out these guys, with their demolition review time, but it can all go, everything. And you do have signs of it. And, you've gotten lucky. The people who have been building in those kinds of places and those kinds of changes have, employed some pretty good architects in most cases. So, you've got to think about that. And do you want that for your neighborhood?
Yeah. Thank you. I'm sorry, I just have one quick follow-up question. So I guess earlier you mentioned that given the amount of resources that we have in town, we've maybe haven't done as much preservation as we could. Did I understand kind of where you're going with that? Do you have any examples of towns within this country that are shining stars that we can look for inspiration? Thank you.
Wow. I'm going to have to think about that one. New York City. But, that's not Concord. You're 18,000 people. To find you one where someone has done as good a job. I came in as your planner worrying that I wouldn't be able to tell you anything. Really, because it's Concord.
Yeah, well.
And I was your planner for the Freedom's Way National Heritage Area, so I knew Concord. I was thrilled to be brought on board because it was a huge honor to be chosen. But I was really nervous. Will we be able to come up with some ideas that you all need? And I realized, my gosh, there's just not nearly as much preservation as Concord deserves. Who else has done? I mean, Medford, maybe. I mean, there's some towns in Massachusetts. Salem's doing, they're really working hard. Sudbury, yeah. We did, my company did the plan for Sudbury. But we came up with ideas for them too. They're not, no one's perfect. I think it's not the result, it's the journey. Are they paying attention all the time to the balancing on the fiscal sustainability and all of the education that has to be done is constantly just never losing touch with all of the different moving parts here that we've just talked about. Joe?
I just want to talk a little bit about underrepresented communities.
Sure.
And have some, you guys have done some really hard work, obviously, over the last few months, some feedback about how those voices are going to get in there. I'm sure you have a plan for it. I just want to talk about it a little bit. I know that, we all know historic preservation really from the 20th century. A lot of it was based on preserving a very specific kind of history. There are often a lot of folks who weren't represented in what was preserved. So I'm assuming this historic preservation plan, we're going to try to ameliorate some of that and actually preserve stories that we haven't preserved before. So that's my question. A lot of communities are doing equity-based preservation planning. I think Austin and Des Moines are two really good examples by really involving the unrepresented voices in the planning process. So I'm just curious, how are we going to get unrepresented voices in this planning process? I know that at least in these focus groups, nobody from the Robbins House was asked to participate in any of those. So I don't think that was intentional, but it's like that's a good place for unrepresented voices, at least in Concord's Black history, to be in there. And then we certainly have immigrant history. We have lots of histories. We have the 400 acres and the 200 homes and businesses that were taken for the creation of the national park. How do we get that story in there as well? So what is I know this might not be the place yet, maybe it comes later, but what is your thinking about how do we get unrepresented voices into the planning process so they get in our historic preservation plan? So 50 years from now, when people talk about Concord's history, they're talking about all these folks.
Sure. You sat on my shoulder as I was really trying to assess this. And if I were asked outside of Concord, who's doing a good job, I would say you guys. I think it's to your credit that you're not resting on your laurels, that there's more to do. And the hunger for it in the survey, lots of hunger for underrepresented stories of all kinds. And I'm happy to tell you the Historical Commission kind of helped get it started way back when, in the 80s, when there was, maybe even late 70s, they were really looking at the immigrant changes, the changes that happened in West Concord, the variety and the understanding that was a whole different story than most people were learned in Concord, and so it's built from there, and it's been wonderful things. Robbins House is a nationally important story just for the way you all did what you did, but I think you've got more to do, and I would urge you not to cherry pick. I would urge you to really look at that survey. That survey gives you power to go in and really dive deep and find more things that we just don't know now. We know we're looking for underrepresented, but I think as you get sort of out and you get a big aperture and you really look, you may find even more than we know now. We don't know what we don't know. Just use a trite phrase, but it's important to keep that in mind. And I don't think anybody's not wanting to do that now. I think that's, I think all of the sites, I think more talking among the sites and how they're going to do it. One of the difficulties for the Historical Commission, the Historic Districts Commission, is that we can't tell the historical sites what to do. We can praise what's good, and I think we should, but I think it's hard to sort of organize it. And yet, there are standards, there are values that I think can be articulated by the commission and the plan, and we will do that. In terms of the public, this is our public outreach, our physical public outreach. We had a community survey. We don't know, the demographics of the people who participated in the survey, but we're hopeful. I mean, we had 338 people who participated in the plan, so I hope that it reached, a wide variety of people in town.
Elizabeth, can I ask a follow-up question about the neighborhood conservation district? Is it possible, so if the neighborhood came together and came up with its own criteria, as you suggest, would it have enough legal power to withstand a McMansion?
If you...
Because you talked about massing
Right.
and size and scope and shape.
Right.
So if it's limited to X number of square feet or height.
Yes, right. You already, the floor area ratio system that you have for new construction is designed to try to keep that to a dull roar, let's call it. The neighborhood conservation district could maybe reduce it. I don't know whether you can tie demolition, forbidding demolition in an NCD. I don't think so, Ann. That's not my understanding. Is it the only thing, if you want to stop demolition altogether, it's a historic district, okay? It might be different guidelines for different historic districts. That is done. You don't have to have the same guidelines across the community, although it's easier and better in some ways, in my view, because everybody knows what they're buying. But yeah, it's important to think that through. Yeah. I mean, maybe you can, ratchet down the floor area ratio to be able to keep that sort of scale in the community. Yeah. There's so much in my head and probably in yours, but why don't we take a break and let's have you write, if you've been writing thoughts, and let's come up and put them up on the board, and let's talk a little bit more after we get you guys. I mean, some people just don't really want to participate this way, but if they'll write me some stuff, we'll get you. We'd love to hear from what's your ideas. What are the things that you enjoy most about what you're seeing, that you have highest hopes for, what's missing? Those are the two big questions, I would say. What do you really like and what's missing? Yes, please do. Please do. Stretch, breathe, straighten up. Yeah, let's take 15 minutes or so. If you're still going, still writing. Let's gather back together. We are headed for trying to be done by 8:30 and no later than 9. That clock is not right. Sorry, guys. Yeah, I've got 8:15 here. We've got time. Okay. Well, I was going to start by just going to each poster and reading what's up here so that our folks on our chat. Kim, do we have anything in the chat that we should be passing on to everybody? Okay. All right. So let's go look at what we found. No one worries about operations, but I can tell you that the Historical Commission will. Okay. We'll keep going on that. We got some education, and feel free to keep adding. We don't have to stop here. So cooperation between town organizations to promote unrecognized and undertold stories. Thank you, Joe, for getting this reminder. You didn't write that. All right, you see? The message is out there. Yay. Who's got blue? It's okay. More work, giving a comprehensive history of Concord. What don't we know? Immigrants, Black citizens, neighborhoods. More complete story of the indigenous occupation here. Wonderful. And, one of the things that you guys told me, one of the things that's going to be in this plan is going to be something called a historic context, which is kind of an explanation of your history in terms of how you see the layers on the landscape of, when the Fitchburg Railroad came through here, it changed West Concord, right? It changed here. And, and so what changes in your history happen to give us resources that indicate those changes. And, you know, so you can kind of what's called reading the landscape and understanding that. But what you don't have is an actual just history of Concord. And oh my gosh. And, you know, it's stunning. Listen, I'm already researching for the context, and I can tell you that the story of the 19th century, after Thoreau, second 2 quarters of the 19th century, you have an amazing story in terms of your resources and not as much population expansion as I expected in there. So there's something going on in terms of the way this community interacted in the region and in the eastern Massachusetts and made its living. Lots of different ways to really look at the story here and tell a complete story, because it will encourage, I think, you know, more asking questions about all the other stories. We need to keep going, you know. I think with Bob Gross's books on the Minuteman in their world and the Transcendentalists in their world, I'm getting through both of them at the same time right now. And, you know, he opens sort of new worlds for people to sort of think about, well, gee, how did that happen, et cetera. So, that, you know, with every good book that comes out, you get more. So let's just encourage that in some kind of way. You could almost do, you know, book awards for Concord history or something to try to get more of that. Anyway, educate realtors. Yes, for the new folks who come in, how do they access information about Concord and understand the permitting and other things that they need to know about living in their community? So realtors could be a big, and this is not a new idea, this was done. It's just faded from memory and usage, and we simply have to revive it. So there's actually even, you know, a brochure somewhere for that. In terms of stewardship and documentation, love the idea of the indigenous cultural landscape. So do I. We will be putting the slideshow out on the web, and the link to go read about what that is in there. It's a National Park Service website. It's got portals. It's a portal to sort of all the other studies that have been done. It's really cool. It's like distance from water and upland and wetland, and it's great. It's really great. Stewardship and protection of open space. Avoid conflict between conservation and intelligent development. So intelligent development might mean clustering or something else. What would that mean? Smart growth? Smart growth? Yeah. Usually I think people think of smart growth as incorporating conservation. So if there's anything more that we need to think about from that comment, we'd love to know more. Convert the entire Route 2 frontage in front of MCI to meadow. I love it. I love it. You have to be careful in terms of attracting wildlife critters into something like that than by the road. But the instinct there is to understand that, you know, you don't want sort of high impact development right on the road. That would change the character of that road, actually. Right now, there's a lot of woods along the road. So, yeah, I mean, I think, you know, MCI Concord is such a great opportunity for the community to really step into the future with additional development and show. I'd love the comment about how do we make new history. This is new history coming to you. It's a real great possibility. George W. Dugan's property in Concord for historical Black Concord. George, is this the soldier's property? You know where it is? She found it? Wow. Yeah. Yeah. Best work is so great. You can see every time you ask a new question and slice through the same stuff you thought you had, you find something new. It's so great to do that. And that's part of the fun, I think, of being in this field. So yeah, thank you. That's great. Economic vitality, how to manage sustainable financial viability, really important. And then large homes and expensive homes do not promote a diverse, vibrant community. How can we plan to develop more housing. And this is a classic example of what we saw in the survey. This is the conundrum for Concord. It's really probably the top one, I'm not sure. I mean, like I've said several times this evening, so many different issues in Concord come together when you ask questions about historic preservation. A lot of moving parts to try to figure it all out. Avoid mansionization while fostering sustainable, diverse, and appropriate development. Same thing. This is Stefan. He came up with this, the Venn diagram. He caught us, Anne. I didn't make the change to the Venn diagram that had the society, economy, environment diagram. And if you notice, there's one of the overlaps had historic tax credits. And we actually don't have that many opportunities for historic tax credits, but Stefan's comment is tourism is one of the things that comes through that. And we had another one, Anne. You came up with, what was the other one that you wanted to put in there? Yes, that's right, the downtowns, right. We had both, so we had substitutes for that. So, you know, we'll get to Canva and fix it for the final plan. How do you reuse the Peabody School, which is the architectural collaborative 1960s? Yeah, 1960s middle school. And how do you think about that? And I would say that we don't really need to get into the specifics of something like that in the plan, but principles are important. And one of them will be documentation of that building. And don't decide to just demolish and change because it's great land to build something else on until you know the whole story of that site. That's, I think, one of the things about demolition review that's been so good, and especially since Anne came on board in the last couple of years. Every time someone comes in the door wanting to demolish something, the commission, with Anne's help, gets research done. And sometimes, a couple of times, I think you've snatched it from the jaws of demolition because the owner said, "Oh, isn't that interesting?" So it's a very important practice to just understand what you have before you make final decisions about it. And then ZBA deferred authority for 40B applications. Consider a similar authority for HDC properties. I would need help on this one. Anybody give me this person who wrote that? You got an idea?
It's probably a question of legislation and jurisdiction and everything else, but the 40B decisions are made by one board.
Mm-hmm.
And historic district property, I'm sorry. Historic district property, you still have to go to the historical commission and the planning board and the natural resources commission and there are situations where historic district could say, do this, and natural resources says, do that, and they're mutually exclusive. By having one permitting authority make all the decisions, they'll have to reconcile the things that are in conflict with each other. But if you're looking to make for a easier process for the property owner, that's one way to think about it.
Well, we're producing a technical paper on housing and preservation, trying to for Concord, and that is a question I had. Is there any way that some of this, that we could figure out some streamlining that you would get if you saved the building? You know, you didn't have to go through some of that. I don't know.
I don't have an answer, but
Yeah.
it's just a thought.
Right. So, yeah, thank you. We'll keep an eye on that. Yeah. I mean, when you see us call for a package of all these things, we're thinking that someone, not necessarily us, because this is a lot of dialogue and a lot of planning, is going to figure out kind of all those little pieces. And we've got inklings, and we'll put those down in paper. Another thing to say that I talked about with one person here is that this is the beginning. Getting this plan done is the beginning, not the end. Every year, this group is going to be doing an annual report, maybe better than they have to do for the town meeting. It's great to have that, you know. It's wonderful history to have that. But they could do a little bit more, and they could key that documentation to the goals and report back to the community and say, hey, this is what we've seen this year. This is the trends, emerging issues we're seeing. here's what we've accomplished, here's what's still got to get done, and this is the next thing that we're going to do. Create a work plan. I mean, goes back to operations. This is why it's so important. Is, a work plan every year, do it in public so everybody has a chance to weigh in and think about, because Anne is a full-time historic preservation, senior planner for historic preservation. No, she's not full-time. So all the volunteers that we have here and the Historic Districts Commission, that's it. So we've got to figure out how to, wield our resources well, and maybe make the argument that you could do more if you had more resources, more staff and more staff time, and more volunteer organizations. I don't know, somehow to bring more people into the process. Lauren and I had an interesting conversation. Oh, we got somebody. Oh, Stuart. Hey, Stuart, how are you?
Hi, great to see you again.
Yeah.
If I could, just because I had the good fortune to participate in the economic vitality focus groups. I was just looking at the economic vitality goal here, and I would love to, having sat with many of our peer institutions, nonprofits, for-profits, local businesses on Main Street in that panel, when I look at the goal of sort of establishing, pedestrian-friendly economic and social hubs, of course, we love being part of this community. I don't live in Concord. I work there every day, and I value all of its, it's a very special place. I think the one common thread that we heard in our group was Concord Museum, the Concord Library, the Umbrella. These are all these organizations, these institutions, as well as our businesses. I'd love to see a new preservation plan set a goal that would be pedestrian, neighborhood, and business friendly. As one of its core goals in the plan, because I think, going back to that earlier speaker, there's so much that is valuable about Concord, but so many of our institutions contribute to that quality of life that makes it such an amazing place to live, that makes people want to come here. And yes, we also drive tourism and we drive visitors to come to town. But, we also know that we're doing that within really precious historical resources and neighborhoods. Sometimes there's a feeling among some of the businesses, and I include the nonprofits and maybe even some of the schools, the institutions, we work there, we're dug in, but sometimes the historical preservation plans feel like they're outside of us and what we contribute to the community. So I think I'd just like to sort of make a case for, considering the sustainability for these great main streets and these high streets that we have in the cultural districts to kind of sustain the institutions as well, not just the sort of walkable neighborhood aspects of it, but we all need to thrive.
Yeah.
And it's an affluent enough town that we can maintain that balancing act and thrive.
I'm going to flip back to that community criteria thing that we did. Sorry, guys. It takes a while with these transmission things here. There we go. It's coming up. There we go. Stuart, when you talk about the different sort of sectors of the community and the different issues that are coming up for the different communities, I think the way to begin thinking about it is really hark back to your plan and make your argument through the community, the 5 criteria for decision making in the community. We need X, come up with something very specific, and you make your argument on how it helps with history and character, livability and values, mobility, accessibility, environment and sustainability, and fiscal sustainability, and just sort of help the community understand that this is how you live those values. Does that help? That's one idea, at least for you in response. And, we can... what we're trying to do with this plan is to enable robust community conversation ever since. That you have, everything is sort of all the different moving parts have been defined and discussed, and on a daily basis, everyone has to be thinking about, well, if we make this change, how is it going to factor through this system in your comprehensive plan or whatever is replaced by it in the next comprehensive plan? And how do these commissions deal with these questions? So thank you. I appreciate the echo of that. Other comments or conversations? Commission, you all have been, I was going to say, Lauren and I had a nice conversation about trying to create something that sort of shows you the difference between a historic district, a neighborhood conservation district, well-defined, and then maybe just a light zoning overlay approach that, you know, for selected communities in some way, you know, that we make a few more changes to FAR or some floor area ratio, sorry, I use the jargon, and, you know, other kinds of adjustments like side yard setback. I don't know. These are the kinds of things that get really picked through when you do it. But to try to look at, you know, and so the communities that are concerned about, you know, their street, their neighborhood, have a menu. They can see kind of what, you know, if they're worried about certain things, then they might have to go for a historic district. If they're worried about other things, maybe just the zoning overlay is okay. Yeah.
And just to add to that, thinking also about what does listing on the National Register really do? Because
Correct.
I think there's a lot of confusion about that,
Yeah.
that it recognizes locally important properties as well as nationally important properties, but it's an honorary designation, and it doesn't really do protection. So,
Right.
except for, of course, we know for federally funded initiatives, but to really put that in a table
Yeah.
so that conceptually folks know what the different tools are. And then I think also to look at those towns that are using landmarking as another, would be
Right.
another tool.
You can look at all those tools.
Yeah, and just
right.
to explain what these, and
Yeah.
and then what it would take in Concord to implement any of
Right.
those if you wanted.
Yeah.
I think they all will probably have to go through town meeting and, you know.
I'm going to indulge in a professional to professional conversation real quick because Lauren and I sort of have a favorite organization in mind that Lauren used to work for and I have had contracts with, and that's the National Park Service. But basically, I surprised myself. I wrote something for Ann a long time ago about National Register because, as I've said, I'm archaic in terms of how long I've been in this business. And we got away from doing National Register because if it's eligible, it's protected. It has the same protections if it's eligible or not.
If Mass Historic says it's eligible.
Correct.
Somebody has to say it's.
It has to be
can't
declared, right.
It can't be the Concord Historic Commission.
Correct. Although, if you guys became a certified local government, you'd have a little bit more in your magic wand, a little more. But, you know, the issue, I came up with like 7 different reasons that you want to do this. I mean, I've surprised myself because you know, yeah. Well, that too, but also going after National Register listings. And part of it is my perception that we don't have as much dedication to historic preservation in this society as we should. And you need every tool at your disposal to argue for help, protection, resources like staff. You know, if you could say you have 300 listings in the National Register instead of 27, which you could easily do if you could only get it all written, which is why we don't do National Register nominations, because it's a lot of work. But it's another way of documenting the resource, getting the stories, all of that. So I just think it's, you know, I think it's future-proofing. If we don't get the word out to people that historic preservation is important, you guys are going to become my Irish monks in Concord, saving the little bit that you've got protected. And that's my argument. It's sad. I really hate this. I mean, you know, there were so many little old ladies in tennis shoes saving historic resources. You guys had them. Oh my God, you had them. In the 1960s, you were out there in 1968 with these little bitty forms that the Massachusetts Historical Commission had made up, and it's still in your record. You can see it. And people just love this stuff. Ruth Wheeler was a miracle worker in terms of inspiring this community. Is she on there? Is she up there? She's up there, see? So, you know, we don't have Ruth Wheelers anymore because we sort of over-professionalized ourselves in some ways. The volunteer tradition in this community is so important, and cultivating that and honoring it is really important because that's how you're going to get it done, guys. It isn't going to all be people like me walking in with a briefcase from more than 25 miles away. It's going to take all of you. Yeah. should we say we're done? Or Alan Bogosian, you are our chairman. And you are our fearless leader over there.
I have a little one, and it's just expressing. It's just a frustration trying to encourage preservation or purchase properties to ensure preservation in the face of the economic realities of the system that we're in. Because the pressure, one thing we wrestle with a lot is when a house in a neighborhood of modest houses comes before us for a demolition permit. And many houses already have turned over in that neighborhood. And how can you not say to the person who's before you today that they can't sell their house for the price of a 5,000 square foot house? You know, the lot, you know, it's a big economic gap there. And it's fundamentally, it seems fundamentally unfair.
That's well documented in that report that I mentioned about mansionization. There's not just, there's a committee report from like 2002 on mansionization, but then in about 2015, someone wrote exactly what you're talking about. It's written down for Concord, and it is. Here's what's happening elsewhere. There are two things that are tools that we actually haven't talked about. They're not up here. And one is that you have in New England, it's nationwide, but it's a group called the 1772 Foundation, and they will grant $20,000 grants to do a feasibility study on creating a revolving fund. Can you buy them, protect them, and resell them? And there are communities that are doing this. It's ordinarily, if we call it the revolving fund, it's really an endangered properties fund. But you're also seeing it to help people keep their houses up. We're beginning to see money in preservation like we used to see in land trust. Land trust didn't used to buy easements.
Yeah.
Now they do.
Yeah.
Now, is there an opportunity to buy some of this? It's really hard. And the other is the community land trust, which is a different thing than a land trust, but it's kind of the same, underneath it is the same idea, which is you buy it, protect it, and put it back into the market, into private ownership. The problem is that the subvention, the difference between what you can sell it for once it's protected and you can't get that $500,000 out of it, you know, for the next owner will not get that. So they will not pay for that. So you are devaluing the property in the process, and you have to cover that cost. How do you do that? You know, there's community development financing institutions, CDFIs, that are out there trying to do some of this. I mean, people are trying. I mean, the recognition, if we had preserved the millions, hundreds of thousands of houses that have been demolished, we'd have a good nick at the housing shortage. We've lost so many houses that we actually could have made a bit of a dent, not a big one. If we had saved all those houses that have been demolished, we'd have fewer houses to have to replace them with, if that makes sense there. But it's you know, long ago, you got the Concord Community Land Trust. Where's the Concord Housing Land Trust? That's not the housing land trust that you have. You have a housing trust, but that's really for money. It's not actually going out and preserving buildings and keeping them in the market. And I will tell you that I worked in a community with an underrepresented, a minority community that basically said, we don't want you to do that because we want the ability to see our properties grow in value. You know, because intergenerational wealth isn't going to happen unless you own a home. And a home that can actually achieve, you know, increase in value. So there are equity issues everywhere you look in this one.
Yeah.
It's bad.
Yeah, it's interesting.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Keep at it.
Yeah, we'll try.
We want to thank you all for coming.
You all are wonderful.
Your
Thank
input.
you.
And the Zoom callers, we thank them as well. And we're going to keep moving on.
One quick question. I think this is going to be put up on our webpage. Is that right, Ann? So it would be available for, you know, if someone wants to come back, who's here, wants to look at it, or in the future. Right.
Our meeting is adjourned. Thank you.